Before we go to the phone lines, Max Scott has rejoined us in the studio. He's got some sad news for us this evening. Hi, Max.
Yeah, some incredibly sad news coming out from Tottenham Hotspur, Andy. They've just released a statement saying that it's with immense sadness that we announce the passing of our legendary former striker, Martin Chivers. This is a man who'd scored 118 goals for Spurs, was a part of an incredibly successful period of the club in the 70s, won 2 League Cups, a UEFA Cup, 255 goals off, over a 21-year stellar career. They say we extend our deepest sympathies to Martin's family, friends and former teammates. Our players will wear black armbands during this evening's fixture against Bournemouth. Rest in peace, Martin, one of the all-time greats. So some incredibly sad news on the eve of an important Premier League game for the club, that their legendary striker Martin Chivers has sadly passed away.
Okay, Max, for the time being, thanks for that. Yeah, very sad news that Spurs legend Martin Chivers passed away at the age of 80. Let's find out more about this from talkSPORT's Danny Kelly, a big Tottenham fan, of course. Danny Kelly joins us now. Hi, Danny.
Hi, Andy.
Danny, thanks for coming on.
No problem.
I'm of the age, Danny, where I'm too young to have seen him, but old enough to know just how much of a legend he was for Tottenham Hotspur. I grew up, my dad was a big fan of his. Obviously, that was a club very close to us. My dad, even though he's a Wolves fan, would go and watch Spurs. I sometimes would go with him. And so he was one of the great players that my dad would often talk about. He is or was an absolute legend for Tottenham Hotspur. He's going to be sadly missed.
Absolutely. When Jimmy Greaves, when I was a child, Jimmy Greaves was the Spurs' main striker, but he couldn't be a hero for me because he'd already been there when I started to love football. So the first player, I was a sort of teenager when a young teenager, when Martin really got going at Spurs. He was the first player that I really, really adored. He came to Spurs in the late 60s for a British record fee from Southampton, where he'd been tearing up trees. Didn't immediately get in the Spurs first team because he had to overcome Jimmy Greaves and Alan Gilzean, a legendary forward pairing, when, for whatever reason, Greaves was sold to West Ham. He came into his own in sort of the season 1970, and I'm prepared to say that between 1971 and 1973, so for those 3 seasons, and it wasn't a long period of time, he was the best centre forward in England. He was the best centre forward in Europe. Absolutely unstoppable combination of strength and power. He was one of those players, Darren will know the ones I'm talking about, who wasn't blessed with natural pace, but once he got going, he couldn't be stopped. His ball control and his power meant that quickness wasn't an issue. He would get his shot away.
Danny, let me ask you, that we've got a lot of young listeners, of course, listening to our show, and of course across the talkSPORT network, that obviously wouldn't have seen him play, or even maybe even seen videos of him play. Can you liken him to a player they'll be familiar with?
He's one of those centre forwards who, if the ball was played through to him, you can probably see the type I'm talking about. He would go past the last defender before finishing from any distance. I mean, I've seen Kane do it 100 times. That mixture of not blessed with great pace, but a lot of skill and the strength to hold people off and great finishing. I would say Kane was the most obvious example. Yeah. Kane's in the modern world, he's more well known, but Martin Chivers was in that mould.
Danny, was he still quite heavily connected to the club? Because certainly when I was there, and I can remember, I used to see Pat Jennings quite a lot. So was Martin still really heavily connected to the club?
Absolutely. He'd had various jobs at the FA and things like that, but in the last, I think, decade and a half, he was one of those people who, if you went to the posh boxes, you'd have your dinner with Martin Chivers. He was an ambassador for the club. Obviously, the last day at White Hart Lane, he's one of those people that were rolled out onto the pitch in the rain to be cheered to the rafters. Yeah, right up until his recent illness, Martin has been around the club and recognised by all. As you say, Andy, time passes. People can't all remember or have seen everyone play. But because his picture is all over the place and because he was around the club, he was still very much, Darren, a part of Tottenham Hotspur.
When the news broke, it was in the last ad break, I was talking to a couple of boys behind the glass, and I said, in my opinion, you can ask Spurs fans that are old enough to remember, I'll ask you as well, I think he goes down, without any shadow of a doubt, of one of Tottenham's top 10 greatest players of all time.
He's certainly one of their top strikers of all time.
Yeah.
He's just below Greaves, Kane and Son. I mean, that is some company to be keeping. As I say, I'm happy to put my limited reputation on the line that he was the best player, the best striker in English football for about 3 years. He was a victim, of course. He started for England in the infamous game against Poland in '73 at Wembley, where England had to win to qualify for the '74 World Cup. They didn't. Martin was among those blamed and never played for England again. But no, he's one of the great Tottenham players, and look, it comes to us all. Every time you see a newborn baby, you have to be reminded doors close.
Oh, I think Danny's door's just closed on the internet, but we were going to say goodbye to him anyway. But in case you're joining us now, just to repeat that very sad news, the Spurs legend Martin Chivers has passed away at the age of 80. Let's make some time, shall we, to hear your memories of Martin Chivers, a man that won 2 League Cups and the UEFA Cup with Spurs, making 24 appearances for England, scoring 13 goals. It's always great to hear memories of such great English players or footballers that have sadly passed away. I know lots of Spurs fans and lots of football fans want to have their say on all things Martin Chivers. So if you've got a great memory, maybe you were lucky enough to go and see him play when you were a kid, you went to Spurs, or you maybe met him in the high street. But if you've got a great story about Martin Chivers, we'd love to hear from you this afternoon. 03717223344. We're taking your calls on a very sad evening. Tottenham Hotspur legend Martin Chivers has sadly passed away at the age of 80.